At 65, Colin Firth has finally said the thing the world did not expect him to say. Not in an interview arranged by a publicist, not from a red carpet with cameras angled to catch the perfect light. The man who made millions fall in love with Mr. Darcy, who stood at the Oscar podium playing a king learning to speak his truth, has spent recent years living something far more complicated than any role he ever took. And now he has admitted to the love of his life. The question is, who or what that love actually is. Because the answer he has arrived at is not the one anyone was expecting. Colin Andrew Firth was born on September 10, 1960, in Greyshot, Hampshire, England. His father was a history lecturer. His mother was a comparative religion scholar. Dinner table conversations in the Firth household revolved around Kant and theology, not feelings. Young Colin was bright and restless, the kind of child who felt everything deeply but had no vocabulary for it. Drama became his language. At the Drama Centre London, he wasn't the most naturally gifted in the room, and he knew it. But he had something that casting directors eventually noticed: the ability to convey pain without saying a word. That quality, which would one day earn him an Academy Award, was not something he developed in a classroom. It was something he had been practicing since childhood, in a house where emotion was an intellectual problem to be analyzed rather than a human experience to be felt. He internalized everything. He kept his armor polished, even when bleeding underneath. And that habit, so useful on screen, so quietly destructive in life, would follow him through every relationship he ever had. His breakthrough came in 1995, when he stepped into a lake in Derbyshire and emerged as Mr. Darcy. The BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice turned a wet linen shirt into a cultural shorthand for a particular kind of masculinity: brooding, restrained, deeply feeling, but constitutionally incapable of saying so. Suddenly, Colin Firth was the man every woman wanted, and every man felt vaguely inadequate beside. He didn't chase fame, it chased him, and it came dressed as a character who wore his emotional repression as a virtue, which was, for Colin, something close to a trap. Because the world fell in love with a man who doesn't speak his feelings, and then expected Colin Firth to be that man off-screen too. For 30 years, he obliged. The Bridget Jones films deepened the trap. Mark Darcy, reliable, patient, secure enough in himself to wait while the woman he loved figured out her mess, was not a character so much as a promise. Here was the ideal, the man who loved without condition, who stayed without resentment, who never demanded anything in return, except that's the role, not the man. And the man, off-screen, was already showing signs of someone who gave too much and asked for too little. When he won the Oscar in 2011 for The King's Speech, playing a monarch struggling with his own voice, learning to speak when everything in him wanted to stay silent, the parallels were almost too obvious. He was applauded for portraying a man learning to tell his truth while still swallowing his own. The armor was immaculate, the bleeding was private, and no one in the audience could see the difference. Before Livia, before the Italian villa and the scandal that would eventually unravel all of it, there was Meg Tilly, and this chapter of Colin Firth's life is one that most people skip past quickly because it does not fit the narrative of the perfectly composed British gentleman. It is too raw, too specific, too revealing of the man underneath the performance. They met in 1989 on the set of Valmont, a period drama filming in France and Czechoslovakia. Meg Tilly was American-Canadian, a former ballerina who had grown up in real poverty in rural Canada. So poor, she has spoken about eating squirrel as a child, about a childhood defined by scarcity and the particular toughness that scarcity produces. She had been Oscar-nominated for Agnes of God. She had a Golden Globe. She had 2 children from her previous marriage. She was, by every external measure, someone whose life was already complicated enough. Colin was disarmed immediately, not by her fame or her looks, though both were considerable, by something harder to name, a quality of realness, of having been genuinely broken and genuinely rebuilt, that someone raised in a house where feelings were philosophical problems would find extraordinary. She didn't perform, she simply was. And to a man who had spent his entire life performing, that was the most intoxicating thing imaginable. He left London. He left his career. He moved to British Columbia, Canada, to a long wooden cabin deep in the woods outside Vancouver. No television, no agents calling, no red carpets. He helped raise Meg's 2 children from her previous marriage. He chopped wood. He made a home. He was, for 5 years, not Colin Firth, the rising British actor. He was a man in love, doing the work that love actually requires, in a place where no one was watching. Their son Will was born in 1990. In the 5 years they spent together in that cabin, by all accounts from people who knew them both, were among the most genuinely alive years of Colin's life. Meg has said that she and Colin both believed, while they were in it, that they were the love of each other's lives. The word she used is significant. Not that she loved him, that she believed he was it. Past tense, earned through the particular grief of losing something you thought was permanent. The relationship ended in 1994. The distance had accumulated, not geographical distance, because they were in the same cabin, but professional distance. The particular erosion that happens when one person's career has stalled entirely and the other person's is waiting, somewhere back in England, to become what it was always going to become. Colin returned to London. Within a year, he was Mr. Darcy, and the man who had spent 5 years chopping wood in the Canadian wilderness was suddenly the most desired actor in Britain. He has never fully spoken about what it cost him to leave, but his son Will grew up in Canada with his mother and eventually moved to England as an adult to pursue his own acting career. And Meg Tilly, when Colin won his Golden Globe in 2010, wrote on her blog, "Our happy hats off to a member of the family. We are so pleased for you. Hearty jigs are being danced. Tonight we shall all lift a glass of wine to toast your continued success. Jubilant hugs and kisses from all of us." In 1996, Colin met Livia Giugioli on the set of the BBC miniseries Nostromo, filming in Italy. She was a production assistant. She was Italian, warm, passionate in the way that Colin, with his Hampshire childhood and his drama-centered discipline and his years of emotional compression, found both dazzling and frightening. She cared about art, about environmentalism, about making something that mattered. She didn't care, or so it seemed, about the fame that was now following him everywhere he went. He was completely disarmed. There is something in Colin Firth's romantic history that becomes visible only when you look at all of it at once. He is drawn consistently to women who are fully formed in themselves, women with a world that does not require him at its center. Meg Tilly had her children, her writing, her fierce independence. Livia had her activism, her Italian family, her vision. And Colin, who had learned from childhood that the proper response to other people's visions is intellectual admiration rather than negotiation, made himself fit. He accommodated, he funded, he praised. He showed up to red carpets alone when Livia preferred to work, and told journalists she had better things to do than celebrity circuits, and sounded, when he said it, like a man who had found exactly the partnership he deserved. They married in 1997, 2 sons, Luca and Matteo, London, and a sprawling villa in Umbria. Livia transformed the Italian property into an eco-conscious haven, and Colin made it possible, and the world saw a couple with substance, grounded and purposeful. What the world did not see was a man slowly erasing himself to make room for someone else's vision. And then there is the detail that cuts deepest. In 2003, Colin appeared in Love Actually as Jamie, a man who discovers his girlfriend sleeping with his brother, retreats to France, falls in love with his Portuguese housekeeper, and eventually travels to Portugal to propose badly and publicly in the language he barely speaks. It is absurd and romantic and completely impossible. Audiences loved it. But what was not in the press notes, Colin had actually taught himself Italian before his marriage to Livia, not for a role, because he loved a woman from Italy and wanted to meet her in her own language. He was, for a long time, exactly that man. The question the next 15 years would slowly and painfully answer was whether the man he had made himself into for love was the same as the man he actually was. In 2011, Colin Firth stood at the Academy Awards podium and accepted the Oscar for Best Actor for The King's Speech, a film about a man who cannot speak, who has been silenced by trauma and shame and the impossible weight of expectation, learning, at last, to open his mouth and say what is true. In his speech, he was gracious and funny and thoroughly composed. Livia sat in the audience looking radiant. It was the kind of night that looked, from the outside, like an arrival. Everything had been worth it. All the years, all the choices, all the accommodation, and the quiet self-erasure. Here was the proof that it had been leading somewhere good. What nobody in the room could see was that somewhere inside the marriage, behind the smile and the perfectly pressed evening wear, something was already breaking in ways that Colin would not fully understand until it was too late to repair. By 2015, he and Livia had quietly separated. Only close friends knew. They were, as people in failing marriages tend to do, trying to figure out if what they had could be saved. During this separation, Livia reconnected with Marco Brancaccia, an Italian journalist she had known since childhood. What began as nostalgia became an affair. They were seen together in Italy, outside the reach of the British press. When Colin and Livia reconciled in 2016, she ended things with Marco. He didn't take it well. The messages that followed were heated and hurt. Were they threatening? Marco said no. Livia said yes. And Colin, being Colin, believed his wife. In 2018, Italian media exploded with the stalking charges Livia had filed against Marco. Colin released a statement of support immediately. He stood by her publicly, with his name, his reputation, his lawyers. He did not waver. He was the man he had always played, honorable, steadfast, the one you could count on when the world was trying to make you a target. And then in 2019, Livia withdrew the charges, released a statement admitting the relationship had been consensual. Marco had receipts. The messages proved that she had pursued him, that his attempts to reach her afterward were confusion and hurt, not harassment. The Italian press tore into Livia. The British tabloids mostly buried the update, but the damage was total. Colin had been humiliated twice, once by the affair, and again by being turned into a weapon against an innocent man. He had offered his name as a shield, and the person he was shielding had been lying. Everything he believed about his marriage, about Livia's character, was now suspect. He retreated into silence. There was nowhere else to go. In December 2019, they announced their separation. In 2020, as the world locked down, the divorce was finalized. Colin was alone in London. His sons were adults. The Italian villa was a negotiation. The man who had learned a language for a marriage, who had shaped his entire adult identity around it, was starting over at 60, with nowhere to go and no character to hide inside. This is where Stanley Tucci enters the story, not as a footnote, but as something closer to a lifeline. Colin and Stanley had known each other since Conspiracy in 2001, the HBO film in which they played Nazi officials trying to keep their faces composed while being complicit in something monstrous. The friendship that grew from that work was real and sustained. When Stanley lost his first wife, Kate, to cancer in 2009, Colin was there, not in any way that made the papers, but in the way that actually matters. Now the debt was reversed. In 2020, as Colin navigated the wreckage of his marriage in a locked-down London, Stanley was the person who called, who showed up. And the project they chose to make together, Supernova, directed by Harry McQueen, became more than a film. It became the place where Colin Firth finally let himself feel what he was not yet able to say in his own life. In Supernova, Colin plays Sam, a musician in a 20-year partnership with Tusker, played by Tucci, who has been diagnosed with early-onset dementia. The film is a road trip across the Lake District, two men revisiting the places they have loved together, knowing this may be the last time. Sam is the buttoned-up one, fussing, unable to accept what is coming. The film asks what it means to love someone you can no longer save. Variety wrote that Firth and Tucci gently smash your heart to smithereens. The film holds 89% on Rotten Tomatoes. Watching Colin play Sam, the man who cannot let go, who keeps trying to fix what cannot be fixed, it is impossible not to feel he is not entirely acting. He is borrowing the character's grief to try on some of his own. Then came The Staircase in 2022. Colin as Michael Peterson, a man accused of murdering his wife, a man whose entire public persona of decency concealed something darker. It was the most counterintuitive casting of his career, and it was deliberate. He wanted to challenge the image that had followed him since Darcy, to play someone whose charm is the deception, whose apparent goodness is the lie. It was not comfortable work. It was necessary work, the kind of work people do when they are trying to understand something about themselves that they cannot access directly. On the set of The Staircase, Colin met Maggie Cohn. She was a writer and producer on the series, American, sharp, known for her work on American Crime Story and Narcos Mexico. She had won a WGA award. She was someone who made her living understanding how people deceive themselves and others, how the stories we tell about our lives diverge from the lives we are actually living. She and Colin were spotted in February 2022 at a lunch date in West London, walking, talking, apparently unguarded in a way that people who have known Colin Firth professionally say is unusual for him. Deep in conversation and looking very happy, a witness told the Mail on Sunday. Colin appeared to be cracking a couple of jokes, and they giggled together. He was in a flat cap and a quilted jacket. She was in a turquoise checked wool coat. They were two people in their early 60s, walking through London in the winter sunshine, and they looked, by all accounts, like people who had found something they hadn't expected to find. They went public in October 2022 at the premiere of Empire of Light at the London Film Festival, the first time in years Colin had appeared at an event with a partner. The photographs show two people standing close, in the way people stand when they are genuinely comfortable, rather than performing comfort. Maggie Cohn does not know Colin Firth from Mr. Darcy. She is a woman who has spent her career understanding how people deceive themselves, how the stories we tell about our lives diverge from the lives we are actually living. She can see behind the armor, and she does not appear to find what she sees there frightening. In a 2025 interview, he said something that landed differently than his usual diplomatic responses. He said, "The love of your life is not always the person you spent the most time with, or the person you chose first, or the person you stood by when you should have walked away. Sometimes it is what you find when you stop performing and start telling the truth. When you stop accommodating other people's visions and start inhabiting your own." He did not name Maggie. He did not name Meg. He spoke in the careful way of a man who has learned that silence is not strength, but a more elegant form of hiding, about what it means to finally be known, not recognized, known. At 65, Colin Firth is not the man in the wet shirt. He is not Mark Darcy, patient and uncomplicated. He is a man who gave everything to love, more than once, and was not always treated accordingly, who went to Canada and lost 5 years of his career and never once described it as a mistake, who defended a lie with his own name because he could not bear to look at the truth, the love of his life. At 65, he has finally admitted to it. What do you think of Colin Firth's story and the kind of love he has finally found? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next one.